and welcome to the Southern Ontario Sports Podcast. This is the week of Monday, December 8th, 2014. Thank you for tuning in. Please give us a follow on Twitter at the SOS Podcast. My personal account is at AdamJThomas1, and Steve's is at Steven Resnick. Okay, Steve, it's been a few weeks since we've been on the air. How are you doing? How's everything in Toronto?
Doing pretty well over here. It's not too bad in terms of the winter weather just yet, and all the sports teams seem to, if they're not doing well, they're at least keeping themselves in the news, so everything's entertaining over here at least.
Yeah, Toronto sports teams definitely in the news. Jays, another couple moves, Leafs winning a few games, Raptors playing good basketball, so can't argue with you there. Myself, I'm a little bit pumped over the weekend, some just crazy outcomes in the NFL. The Senators found a win for once, which was nice. So why don't we just get into things right off the top? Chat a little baseball. Again, the Jays keeping relevant despite the slow time of season, generally speaking. Few moves by them again. So right off the bat, maybe we'll talk the Donaldson for Brett Lawrie trade, plus a few prospects. So the Jays sending out pitchers Kendall Graveman and Sean Nolan, as well as shortstop prospect Franklin Barreto, with Lawrie, of course, and receiving Josh Donaldson from the Oakland Athletics. So big move here for the Jays, sending out Lawrie, a fan favorite, but perpetually an injury concern and somebody who's never really fully blossomed to his full potential. In exchange, they get an everyday third baseman, maybe even MVP caliber third baseman, depending on the season. And certainly, a good hitter to add to the lineup. So, Steve, how do you feel about this deal?
Yeah, I think similar to the Russell Martin one, I don't think many people were thinking this position was a place the Jays were going to look for a serious upgrade in over the offseason. But I think if you get the chance to get a player like Donaldson, you got to do it. He's arguably one of the top 5, even top 3 third basemen in the entire league, let alone the American League. Lawrie, he's a good player, great defensively, but like you said, very injury prone. You never really know how many games you're going to get out of him every year. I think with the pitching depth, it's not going to hurt the Jays too much. I don't think Nolan and Graveman were going to be impact players, at least this year, let alone in the future. And it seems the biggest impact they might lose is Barreto coming up in the future. But I think all things considered, the best player in the deal was Donaldson, and the Jays are the one who got him.
Yeah, exactly, and I do support this move. It's tough to see Brett Lawrie go. He really was a fan favorite despite the numbers and so forth. But the catch for him, and I think you sort of hit on it, was, he's a great defensive player, but that's also what's putting him at risk for his recurring injuries and so forth. So maybe the smart move was to depart, and you can't go wrong with a player like Donaldson. He's really going to help this lineup, especially with the likely loss here of Melky Cabrera. And maybe we'll swing into the Michael Saunders Jay Happ trade between the Jays and Mariners. The Jays shipping out Jay Happ for Michael Saunders, bringing in another Canadian face, which is a nice touch as well. He'll probably slide in as the everyday left fielder for the Jays. Of course, with Melky Cabrera now looking to be on the outside of this situation. So how do you like the Michael Saunders pickup?
I think there's got to be some internal Canadian quota the Blue Jays have to have that no one really knows about that. That's why if they ship out one Canadian, they got to bring in at least one other with Saunders. Although I guess it's probably not too normal where the Canadian player gets straight to the Canadian team and now he's actually farther away from home, he was pretty much just around the corner with Seattle and Vancouver. But for the Jays, they definitely needed at least one major league ready outfielder to come in if they're losing Melky. Rasmus gone as well. Who really knows? Dalton Pompey, he had a good last month of the season, but that's not really much in terms of how he's going to pan out for this year. You definitely need another guy there. Saunders, dependable. I don't think you can expect the world from him, but I think having him in there gives you another guy who's major league capable.
Yeah, and he had a nice season last year in Seattle, taking a nice 40-point bump on his batting average. So maybe this is another case of the Jays trying to buy high, hope to carry over a little bit of that success. So we'll see if that can help the lineup a little bit. But I guess the question here maybe boils down to with Happ moving out, you have a spot open on the pitching staff in general. It looks like the Jays will probably stick with Dickey and Burley, return Hutchinson, hope for another strong year at a Stroman. So they've got a gap there in that starting lineup. Maybe Sanchez bumps up. Who knows with Daniel Norris, pardon me. Maybe it's a player not on the roster. So what do you think they do for the pitching staff moving forward in what's been a busy offseason already?
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's going to be Aaron Sanchez's starter position to lose at this point. Whether that's their best option going forward, I'm not really sure. They still do need a closer, and I think Sanchez looked really good in that late inning bullpen role last year in his call up. I think he would be an upgrade on Jansen, and it still gives him time to work on his stuff without being in there working him too hard every fifth day. At the same time, I wouldn't be completely surprised if the Jays do bring in a journeyman fifth arm to do it. I don't think you're going to see them go back to Kyle Drabek or Ricky Romero, God forbid, down into AAA. I think those days are done. So I think it's either Aaron Sanchez or they find some outside help to fill that fifth starter role.
Yeah, and with the way the Jays have been rolling so far, I am sure we'll be talking about this very issue next week, as they've been real busy this offseason and keeping us busy as a result.
Welcome to the National Hockey League.
Then you have the Toronto Maple Leafs,
The home ice advantage is actually a disadvantage.
Ottawa Senators.
If I was an Ottawa Senators fan,
Kessel had a couple goals.
a late goal by Ryan off a nice pass from Carlson.
Gotta love the Habs.
Suarez looking to be a dominant player again.
All right, so let's talk a little hockey, Steve. We will get to our Western Conference Canadian team preview, but we'll tee it up with the Leafs and Senators. The Leafs playing probably some of the best hockey of this season, at least from their perspective. They've been on a real nice stretch here over the last 2 weeks or so since we've last taped anyhow. They've got a loss in there to New Jersey and the Pittsburgh Penguins, but otherwise beating the Capitals, the Stars, as well as Vancouver, who's possibly coming down to earth a little bit. But overall, it's been a good stretch for the Leafs. Bernier's definitely carrying the mail at this point, starting every other night, finding wins on most occasions over this stretch. How do you like the Leafs since we've last taped, Steve?
Yeah, they've definitely looked like they've really started to come together. They got a couple guys back from injury. Lupul's back. Booth is finally in the lineup this year. They lost Komarov for a few games, but up until then, he was arguably playing his best of the season, even getting a few goals, getting even some more points. They also got Brandon Kozin. He's now back and ready to come in when they need him. The defense has seemed to short itself up, even with the addition of Corbett and Holzer, with Polak being injured. And like you said, I think the most important aspect is Jonathan Bernier is now playing great. He started 8 straight. It definitely looks like he's the guy going forward. He's Carlisle's guy, win or lose. And so long as he keeps up this play, I think you got to like the Leafs' chances going forward.
Yes, I will agree. Bernier adds a real level of strength to that roster and dimensional reliability. And if the team, as they are getting healthier, and that's always, I think, been the Achilles for the Leafs, is ultimately their depth has never helped. So when they are healthy, they do seem to be fairly competitive, and you're seeing that. As a result, they're sitting at 31 points. They've actually managed to tie Boston in the standings and virtually give themselves a stranglehold on the 8th place, 7th seed, with the rest of the conference just looking really sad and disappointing. One of those teams, of course, being Ottawa, that's fallen mightily, and we'll chat about them in a second. But if the Leafs do continue at anywhere near or close to this pace, in combination without a true set of contenders in the East sort of rounding out those playoff spots, I think you're right. You do got to like the Leafs down the stretch. But again, the health will be the big question and something nobody can really predict. So they take on Calgary, Detroit a pair of times actually, and then LA over the next handful of days. Do you see good things in the future for the Leafs there, Steve?
I think they're definitely going to have a tough match with Calgary. They've definitely exceeded expectation this year, and whenever you have Brian Burke in the building, it's always a bit of a show here and a spectacle off the ice. They didn't do so well in their last home with Detroit, where they only took 1 point out of 4, but I think they're going to do a little bit better this time. I think the LA game on a back-to-back, you got to sort of chalk that one up as a scheduled loss, but I think out of the 8 available points this week, I think it's possible for them to get 5 or 6.
Yeah, I think Calgary might give them some trouble, actually. Toronto will have a chance at the win, but probably have their hands full. The same might be said for Detroit. Detroit's having a surprising year, in my personal opinion, and they've been exceptionally strong as late, finding quite a few goals. So unless Bernier shows up in those 2 games, Detroit might find themselves with a couple wins, in contrast to maybe your opinion there. And I think we're both in agreement on LA. When that team shows up, doesn't matter who they're playing, they've got as good a chance for 2 points as anybody. So the Leafs, I think they might be in for a bit of a reality check here, but they're playing some good hockey themselves. Of course, the lion's share is going to come out of those 2 Detroit games. So we'll see how they fare against Jimmy Howard and the boys. Swinging on over to the Ottawa Senators, who now sit at 11-11 with 5 overtime losses on the year for 27 points. It's been a rough stretch for this team, Steve, in stark contrast to the Leafs. They did get the win last night in overtime against Vancouver, but that followed 3 straight losses, 3-2 to Pittsburgh, 2-1 to the Islanders, and 3-2 previously on December 2nd as well to the Islanders. Been a rough stretch of hockey for the Senators, a team that came out pretty well to start the year. Problems seem to be working their way in to the lineup. They do have Mark Mathot back, which should help, but overall, just not good enough. Steve, your thoughts on the Sens the past couple weeks?
Yeah, they're still allowing just way too many shots, and while their goaltending isn't bad, you just don't have an elite guy back in there like a Lundqvist or a even, and so when you're allowing that many shots, eventually a few of them are going to wind up in the back of your net, and then of course they haven't been able to compensate that with enough offense up front, and when you get that, you get as many losses as they had in the last stretch. That being said, I don't think there's completely zero hope. Mika Zibanejad had a really nice game last night. The young players, when getting ice time from Paul McLean, have played pretty well. I think it's more a defensive issue they got to work on, more of their in-zone coverage and stopping the shots against and keeping those down, but I'm not really sure if that's going to be possible to do over the course of this season.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like this group is moving in the right direction in that regard, and that probably, as we've discussed a handful of times now, and it seems to be the recurring theme, this will be the Senators' demise in the end, is just too many shots against. They don't have that elite goaltender. They've got a pair of, probably decent, even above average goaltenders, but that's not going to be enough with the style of game that they're playing right now, and just not enough up front. I think the big names in Ottawa are still sleepy a little bit. You're hopeful that maybe down the stretch they come awake, and if it's been a poor 10-game stretch here, maybe they've got 10 or 11 games somewhere in the future on the calendar where they just start filling the net. But in lieu of that happening, so far it's been a fairly disappointing stretch over the past few weeks. They sit only at 27 points now. They're clumped up with the Rangers, Devils, Capitals, and these are all teams that are not strongly considered to make the playoffs, I think, in any meaningful way. So here's what you have with the Senators, and we'll leave it there. Hop right into our Western Conference Canadian quarter season team review. We're going to look at, of course, the Winnipeg Jets, Calgary Flames, Edmonton Oilers, and Vancouver Canucks. Of course, we don't spend as much time talking about the West with our show, so we're going to keep things short and sweet here with these teams. I think the point boils down to for Calgary, Winnipeg, Vancouver. Some decent starts. Can they keep it up, Steve?
I think in Vancouver's case, they definitely can. Not only with Miller, while his numbers haven't been exceptional, he's played well, and he definitely still can improve upon that. Eddie Lack has been pretty good in the backup role, excluding last game in Ottawa last night. But I think they definitely can sustain it. They've got the Sedins up front with Verbata clicking well. Their defense, even with a Hughes injury, it's not bad. They've got solid depth there. I like their chances. Calgary, I'm still not set on. I mean, they've looked great so far. They're scoring goals. They're coming back like nobody's business, and they're getting great goaltending from Hiller and Ramo. But I don't know how long can you expect one pair in Giordano and Brody to carry an entire team. Can they bring them the whole season through the Western Conference? I'm not set on that just yet.
Yeah, I think Vancouver and Calgary, actually. I mean, both teams, I think it's fair to say, are outperforming their initial season expectations. Ryan Miller's fit in terrifically in Vancouver. Certainly, leading the way for their team. He's 16-5 on the season, 2.6 goals against average. He's playing some great hockey. I don't know if they're starting to come down to earth a little bit. The losses against the Senators and Leafs, who maybe aren't so bad, perhaps. But again, West generally does perform well against the East. Part of that might be a road trip, but we'll see if Vancouver can continue the good vibes. Same, of course, to be said for Calgary. Their defensive blue line, as you mentioned, has been dominant this year, piling up the points. So is that sustainable? May not be. As well, I'd like to give a shout out to Johnny Gaudreau, who's been on fire for this Calgary team. He's a bit of an exciting story. So some nice points there for Calgary, but I think they ultimately will level off, especially in this tough Western Conference. That brings us over to the Winnipeg Jets and Edmonton Oilers. We can't forget about them, of course. The Jets playing some probably surprising hockey as well. They're at 33 points now, again in this tough Western Conference, but staying competitive. The one point that comes up in my mind anyway about the Jets is sort of the uncertainty they have in net. Pavelek's been serviceable, but never really taken things and run with it. And as a result, this team's slightly above 500, but maybe a bit better if they can get some lights out goaltending. If you flip over to Edmonton, it's more of the same. It's actually just surprising how this team, year in, year out, sort of has the same level of performance. And the one story note I'll talk on from Edmonton is their goaltending situation, maybe in a similar way to the Jets, where you bring in Scrivens and Fast this year. You hope that's going to settle the ship, but maybe the team in front is just not good enough to play at this level. Steve, Jets and Oilers.
For Winnipeg, I think they definitely have exceeded their preseason expectations. Pavelek has been much better than people expected. Hutchinson has been great, following up a great year in the AHL last year for them. I think, especially in their division, it's a very tough one. But right now, they're holding their position for now. They're right in that chance for one of the two wildcard slots. Their top line, they're getting a lot of offense from Little and Ladd and Wheeler. But again, like you said before, if Pavelek regresses back to his normal stats that he's showing over his career, I'm not too sure they're going to be able, like Calgary, to keep up in the Western Conference. And for the Oilers, while their goaltending definitely could be better, I think you got to look at their defense. They just never really fix it. Justin Schultz didn't really do much. Andrew Ference has really made them worse, and then they signed Nikita Nikitin for a lot of money to allow them to be scored on pretty much every shift he's on the ice. So I think before they fix that, they really aren't going to go anywhere, where if they're allowing 30 shots a game and 10 to 15 of them are of A-plus quality, you can't expect to win too many of those games.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on there. So to wrap it up, of the four Canadian teams in the Western Conference, three of them right now sit in playoff position. Edmonton rounds out the bottom of the conference in last place right now. So do you think, Steve, three of these four teams go to the playoffs? Do you think less? Where does this go for the Canadian Western Conference teams?
I think you're going to see Vancouver get in there, and I'll go out on a limb and say one of Calgary or Winnipeg can squeak in by the end of the year.
Yeah, so it would be nice to see Winnipeg finally. They've had a couple of good runs here the last few years and just not be able to close out the deal. So hopefully they can pull it off this year. But I'm only going to go with Vancouver. I think both Calgary and Winnipeg come up short. Certainly Edmonton does as well. But I'll hang my hat on Vancouver. I don't think they'll finish anywhere near the top, maybe as they sit right now, but give them 6th or 7th seed. I'm comfortable with that.
This is the NFL.
The hometown Bills.
I think Buffalo's going to keep it close. The home crowd will be with them. It'll give them some more energy.
308 yards, a touchdown.
I don't think anyone was predicting the Bills to win.
New England Patriots looking good out there.
No one was going to stop Tom Brady.
New Orleans wins in OT.
San Francisco.
Cleveland pulls out a win. All right, so let's chat a little NFL, Steve. As we alluded to at the start of the show, just a wild weekend overall. I'm just going to list off a few quick points before we get into it, maybe get your thoughts just quickly. But Oakland beats the 49ers 24-13. We're going to talk a little bit more about Carolina just stomping the Saints 41-10. A couple big losses in the NFC North. The Bengals lose to the Steelers to tighten up that division. Browns lose to the Colts. The Baltimore Ravens do beat the Dolphins, so that division as much of a mess as anything. Your just opening thoughts on the weekend as a whole.
Yeah, definitely a lot of great action all the way around, and especially this coming week sets up a lot of good divisional games, which might even decide the divisions right now in Week 15. So a lot of stuff on the line, not only this past week, but now going forward even more so.
Yeah, absolutely, and just wild weekend. We'll see where we go next week. But let's focus the discussion a little bit here. We'll open up with just a few quick comments on the Bills. Our last show, we more or less concluded the team probably wouldn't be competitive for the playoffs. Not so much at their own cost. The team has played pretty well over the course of the year, but ultimately they had what amounted to the toughest schedule, facing the Broncos, Patriots, and Packers over the final 4 games. And we see this weekend in Denver, a great effort by the team, holding Peyton Manning touchdownless for the first time since I believe it's 2010. Some 50-odd games there. So the defense, a really remarkable showing against this offense, but the Broncos find a way to put 24 points on the board anyways, and that spells the end of the Bills. And, I hate to say it, but probably their playoff chances ultimately go with that one. Steve, any wrap up on the Bills there?
Yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of the playoff chances are pretty much done, although they're still mathematically alive. I think hope is pretty much lost there. And like you were saying, also the defense I thought played very well yesterday against Denver. You don't often see Peyton Manning without a touchdown. It's, again, first time in 51 games. But just watching the last 2 minutes, you could see when they need to get points on the board, Kyle Orton is only throwing 7-yard, maybe 10-yard passes, slant routes, and it's just you're going to need to get someone else in there who can at least get out of the pocket or at least scramble to make some plays when you need them and not eat up clock after play after play after play and just not really have a chance to score points when you need them.
Yeah, especially in this day in NFL, I think that's a great point. A good handful of the teams you're going to face on a week-to-week basis through the season, they're high-output teams. You see your Denver Broncos, your New England Patriots, your Packers, teams the Bills are going to play. Those teams put up points, and at the end of the day, you got to have a quarterback that can hang with them. And Kyle Orton is not Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, etc. And the Bills, great defense, but not enough pop on offense at the end of the day. Still an admirable season, I think, will amount. Maybe, there's a chance they finish at 500. We'll see how it wraps up for them. So good luck to the Bills down the stretch, but I think we're no longer talking about playoffs with that team. So we'll switch it up, talk playoffs about two squads in the NFC East who do have playoff implications, that being the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys. Both teams at 9-4 right now. The Cowboys, they go into Chicago and they do what they should be doing against a team like that. They put up 40 points and thoroughly dominate them to take the win. Philadelphia at home against Seattle, a hard-fought game. But Seattle showing some of that experience perhaps, and they do take the win in Philly, dropping the Eagles to 9-4. So with a Big 15 matchup on the schedule, Dallas visits Philadelphia. Pretty well to decide this division. Philadelphia, of course, in Week 13, visiting Dallas, took the win there in pretty dominating fashion. So Steve, we'll boil it down to this. What's your pick this weekend in Philadelphia?
I'm going to take the Cowboys. They got routed at home on Thanksgiving. They definitely want revenge for that. Tony Romo's getting healthier. Des Bryant is still a beast. I like the Cowboys.
So you're sticking with your initial call. I think it was way back in Week 10 when we did our playoff stretch preview. Steve went with the Cowboys. I took the Eagles. And we did both agree that we'd pretty much settled this discussion in Week 15. I'm not going to waver either. I'm going to stick with the Eagles. I will completely agree. I don't think the Dallas offense is asleep after the turkey day they had last few Thursdays ago. But I think the Eagles offense maybe just presents too many problems. Seattle's a real good defense, so I think they were held in check. But watch them come out of their shell again. Be at home for the second week in a row, so no travel, well-rested, ready to go. I think the Eagles perform well. I think it's a high-scoring game. Look for 34-27 final going in the Eagles' direction, and hopefully backing my prediction from Week 10. All right, from there we will swing over to the AFC West, where before we get into a little bit of chat about the division-leading Denver Broncos, I feel it my obligation to remind everybody that one, Steve Resnick, my co-host, boldly predicted the Kansas City Chiefs to beat the Denver Broncos 2 weeks ago. Steve, does any of that sound familiar?
It does, unfortunately, and I should have learned from baseball season to not bet with anything involving a Kansas City team because it didn't really work out too well then. But I should have known, if not then, once they lost to the Raiders, that this team probably isn't made up to compete with the Broncos just yet. And now the loss of Eric Berry on defense, I don't know if they've got it in them to recover now. It's a pretty steep hole, but Kansas City let me down.
And just for the listeners, I'd like to make sure everybody, really remembers what you said here. So let's give this a spin.
I think they're going to want to win this division, and it's going to be very important to them. They're within striking distance. They've got a very good defense, so I'm going to make the bold statement and say that Kansas City is going to come out of the AFC West.
Steve, I'm going to go online here and call you crazy after that prediction.
Yeah, there's not too much to say other than that. I predicted them. I went with them. There's a gut feeling, and unfortunately, I don't have a gut quite like Andy Reid, so it didn't work out too well for me and the Chiefs.
Oh, poor Andy Reid. Well, at least you've seen the error of your ways, good man. We're not going to hold it against one another for the moment. I think maybe in 2015 we'll figure out some long-term better wager to put on the line. But at this point, it's nothing more than bragging rights. So get ready to reload in the new year, Steve. We'll start fresh and go from there. But definitely the win to me on that one. But we need to focus back in here, talk some actual football for a second. So, of course, Denver beats not only the Chiefs a few weeks ago, but the Bills most recently. They've got what amounts to tight hold on the division. I think it's theirs at this point. They've got a 2-game lead over the Chargers. Any reason, Steve, why the Broncos do not close this one out? I know you had high hopes for the Chiefs a few weeks ago, but certainly the picture a bit different now.
Yeah, those hopes have certainly been dashed. I think it's definitely Denver's division to lose at this point. San Diego, tough loss to New England. That's probably the final nail in the coffin for their division chances. I still think you might see the Chiefs or Chargers sneak in a wild card if they can win out and get hot towards the end. And maybe the NFL decides to get rid of the NFC South. They can give one of their spots to them. But we'll see. One of those teams, maybe both of them, might be pretty deserving to get in, and neither may do it.
Absolutely right there, Steve. And maybe speaking of the NFC South, we head there next. Atlanta Falcons right now with a game in hand at 5-7, essentially sitting atop the division. New Orleans gets just crushed by Carolina. New Orleans 5-8 right now. Carolina 4-8, and that one tie. I don't know what you make of this after the weekend. I thought, looking at things, New Orleans, okay, maybe they had a slow start, slow division, so they'll figure it out. They looked good the past couple weeks. They're coming home against a paper-thin Carolina team, and next thing you know, it's 41-10 Carolina. I'm rocked when it comes to division. I'm not going to make a single statement about the future of this thing. I think it's just craziness at this point. But if the Falcons win tonight, they move to 6-7 and first in the division. Steve, how does this work out in your mind?
Well, it works out in my mind. The Falcons do not win tonight, so
Sure.
that pretty much that'll clinch a division winner with a not and above 500 record. So that right there is a great start for them. I think again, it's going to come down to if Drew Brees can decide to be Drew Brees of old. The Saints can take this division, and then they get a home playoff game as a result, and who knows from there. Otherwise, whoever wins, I think if it's a Carolina or Atlanta team that takes this division, I think you're going to see a one and done from them in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think New Orleans, I mean, they at least have, the experience and the career accomplishments of Drew Brees. So I think the experience they have there, Jimmy Graham, and elite talent, they've got the best team of the group. They wrap up the schedule here. They visit Chicago, which, what seems like the home field advantage for the Saints has dried up this year. They're poor at both home and away, but actually less poor away than they are. So maybe a better chance heading out there to Chicago in the elements. Game week 16 against the Falcons. Might be for division title there, who knows? And then they finish up week 17 against the Bucs. So that schedule is, it's certainly favorable to the outside observer. Who knows if the Saints show up at any of those games, but if they do, they'll certainly punch out Atlanta along the way. But ultimately, I think, hold off the Panthers as well to take this division. So we'll see if the Saints can keep it together for an NFC South victory. And that's where we'll wrap up the NFL chat for this week. Like to head over to the NBA where we talk a little bit of Raptors to finish up the show. Road trip over the past week and a half, fairly successful. No real glaring losses, a few wins. They come back in one piece minus DeRozan suffering an injury. Steve, your thoughts on the Raptors over the last little stretch?
Yeah, I think, well, of course, up until the DeRozan injury, they were looking great. Definitely a contender to legitimately win the Eastern Conference. The DeMar injury definitely is going to hurt them. That's a huge part of their team. They've been able to tread water since then. They went 2 for 3 on their Western road trip, although they got lucky they didn't have to play DeMarcus Cousins in Sacramento. But coming up this week, they've got a couple tough games. They got a Denver team that's been playing much better of late. They've got the Cavs again, who just beat them this past week. And then they've got the Pacers and the Knicks. So a couple winnable games there. But if you're the Raptors, I think so long as you can tread water until DeMar's back, with the way the Eastern Conference is, the way especially their division is, they're going to be just fine so long as they can keep that nice little cushion they've built themselves already.
Yeah, they're off to the quick start. Even with a few losses, they still have a 2-game lead over the Atlanta Hawks for the conference lead. I think the injury is the biggest talking point for the Raptors right now. The team's solid. Their opposition on most nights in the East is not going to drown them out. So I think you're right. As long as they can hang in there, survive this injury, they'll be just fine. Certainly in terms of him being a playoff team, if not an upper tier playoff team. The question ultimately boils down to is how long DeRozan's going to be out with this groin. Calling it week to week at this point might be as early as the holiday period coming up, maybe into January, into the new year, but remains to be seen. And ultimately, if you're talking about losing a month, hopefully not more than that, but potentially more, that might start to add up with the Raptors' minutes on a nightly basis. But hopefully they can battle through it. But team is looking just fine right now. I don't think there's any need to nitpick further than that. All right, so that will wrap up the show for this week. We'll have a quick look ahead here. Steve, what are you focusing in on the next week to come?
You got 4 games for the Leafs in a week, so that's a lot to take in, including a couple tough divisional ones with the Red Wings. So I think I'm going to be pretty focused on the hockey during the week and then get to the NFL on the weekend, especially that Cowboys-Eagles game.
Yeah, for sure. That Eagles-Cowboys game, it's Sunday night. That's just a classic rivalry. It's gonna settle things for this season for sure. I think. So we'll get that one on Sunday night, and then Monday night the aforementioned New Orleans Saints go to Chicago, and we can watch the dumpster fire unfold live on Monday night if that's what it's going to be. But I think you got to win there from the Saints. So that'll round out the schedule there, and then I'm treated to a special matchup: the Green Bay Packers visiting the Buffalo Bills. My certain favorite AFC team, the Bills, and my NFC longtime favorite back to the Brett Favre days. So I'll get to tune in and catch them both on one field, and hopefully the Bills don't embarrass themselves too much. So Steve, another good show in the books. I'll catch you in a few weeks, and we'll see you soon, everybody. Take care. Gets to dictate a task for the loser. Probably something embarrassing and humiliating, but you never know. So we're going to give it a dry run here to finish out the calendar year of 2014. So our first Predict Your Pick session, we lead off with the previously touched upon Eagles-Cowboys game in Philadelphia, Week 15. Steve, you're on the clock.
No need to thank the fans. Going to get right to it. I'm picking the Cowboys.
He's going Cowboys. I'm going Eagles. Sticking with our original picks from Week 10. Let's ride them out to the end. Our next matchup from the NHL features the Los Angeles Kings visiting the Montreal Canadiens next Friday night, I believe. Steve, does Carey Price and the Canadiens find a win?
I am going to say yes. I like the Canadiens' home ice advantage. They've got the Bellevaux ceremony on Tuesday. There's going to be a lot of energy still in the building. I like their chances.
If this game were on neutral ice or in LA takes this without question. I think the long road trip cross country has its wear and tear, and the Canadiens are good enough in net to find a win here. Go Habs. And the last one we'll wrap up with from the National Basketball Association on Thursday night. The Cleveland Cavaliers visit the Oklahoma City Thunder. Steve, who's your pick here?
I'm taking the Cavaliers still. OKC's still a bit rusty with Durant and Westbrook back. The Cavs are trying to put together, and I don't really like to bet against LeBron, so I'm taking the Cavs.
He doesn't like to bet against LeBron. I don't like to bet against Durant and Westbrook. I'm going OKC. This is the game they shake the rust off and they start a 20-odd game win streak afterwards. Give me the Thunder. All right, so we'll wrap it up there with Predict Your Pick. Hopefully everybody enjoys that and we'll have some fun with it once pay-up time comes along. So Steve, hold on. I'm just going to edit that. All right, so Steve, another good show in the books. Thank you everyone for listening. Take care and we'll see you next week.